So when Adam asked me, like, would you share your second story? My first question was, what do you mean by that? because um because you'll hear from my story that when I first got organized into the church, because I feel like the church organizes folks in particular ways, um, that brought up for me like share your testimony and do that whole like make sure people get saved so they don't go to hell sort of situation. So that this is not that, but I will say that it is a snapshot of how I am understanding myself, how I'm understanding my relation to God and others, and my call into this work. So first I will say I did not grow up in a religious home. So unlike Jess, I didn't start going to Sunday school until I was almost a teenager. But I did grow up in foster care for many years. And in that, I grew up immersed in a home that was very much into like Black pride, like everything in the art that we had on the walls, the dolls I was able to have and not have, the books I read and didn't read. Um, and then the reality that I enjoyed rights, civil rights and other rights because of the work of my ancestors. Um, both those are am directly related to and generally. And that my job was to get educated so that I could pick up this mantle and do the same because these rights weren't guaranteed to us and could very easily be taken away from us, which is what we're seeing now. I also understood that uh, I also understood that I was not just to ensure that I had what I needed to survive, but the rest of my family and my community. That it was a communal understanding of well-being and not just me and mine. And then the very reality that because of the body I inhabit as a Black woman with a disability in a society that wasn't organized with me in mind, that I would have to struggle to make these things possible, right? That my voice would already be on the margin simply because of how I exist in the world. So we'll fast forward then. I at this point am a teenager and I move with my mom in a different part of New York City, where I encountered so many things like poverty in front of my face, drugs, and um, trying to figure out what it meant to be a teenager, which is already a journey in itself, right? And in this disorienting time of trying to figure all those things out, here enters the church. And I have a friend who often reminds me, because sometimes I look on this part of my life and think, oh my goodness, I can't believe that was me. And he often tells me, like, I have to be gentle with the person I was because it has prepared me to be the person that I am, and that I can relate to folks who will find themselves in particular situations that are the same. So a neighbor invited me to church and very much did the what Jess was talking about, like for God so loved the world and all these things around us, and the world is bad. And so this is a way in which you can ensure that one, you're living the right life right now, and that you'll have eternal life in the hereafter, right? But also there I encountered my first chosen family. It felt good to be a part of a family that were doing the same things, shaping their lives in distinct ways that was different from what I was seeing in the community I was a part of. But I also encountered it also meant that my body needed fixing, right? Because I grew up in um, a Pentecostal church was my first introduction to church. So my body needed fixing because I had a disability, and if I had enough faith then it would be healed. But if I didn't have enough faith, then it's my problem. That we needed God's this blood sacrifice to cover over all our humanness, and that my words and my heart were wicked simply because I was human. And because I wanted to go to heaven, I had to say these words, this prayer, and then aim to live in this way that was pleasing to God by believing the right things. But the aim of this was conformity, and questioning was considered unfaithfulness. They taught me that to argue, but they did also teach me how to argue and how to organize. And so in this work that I'm a part of now, I remember going to Philly and like participating in door knocking essentially for around healthcare. And I was like, oh, I got this. Like, you just take, I can talk to any stranger, and these are the points we're going to talk to. So and at that point, that's where I realized that I could use some of what I learned in the church in a way that's more humanizing, and the work of God. Then, because I've always been a person who questions things. I've never been a person that just takes things as they are. And but the church I was in and many communities, that's the aim, to make sure that you follow exactly the way that you believe and you think and you act in these ways. So for me to continue to have questions was, I just needed more faith, or I was unfaithful. So when I was more exposed to folks that were obviously in obvious poverty, like blatant poverty, and uh, befriending drug dealers because they were the people in my community, and hearing like they're evil, these things, and then having to wrestle with, actually, I know this person and we've had conversations and there's reasons for why we find ourselves in these things. And often they were the people who were more Christ-like, right? Making sure that folks had food to eat and things. And what do we do about addressing the injustice on the earth? Not justice, I'll fly away one day and be in heaven, but what do we do now? And as I continue to read the Bible, Jesus spoke to things here and now, not just in this someday. So, what does it exactly mean to believe in these ways? What if I see God in the work of someone who isn't Christian? That was a big thing, right? Like, you're not good until you say these magic words that make you a Christian, and then you're good now. Um, and I believe this way, and for a long time, even as I was deconstructing and figuring out this doesn't line up for me in both my lived experience and the way that I am interpreting the Bible and the way that they are teaching me to love my neighbors. And yet it seemed more and more that my neighbors had to look and be and act in the world in a certain way to be my neighbor. Otherwise, they were my enemy that needed to be saved so that then they can become my brother and sister. They weren't just people already who bore the image of God simply because they are creations of God. So, fast forwarding more to 2016, there was a group of us within my particular denomination who got together, was seeing the racial uprisings, all these things, and this denomination not saying anything about it. So a group of us got together in at another friend's house, and we would have conversations around how might we go about the work of working from the inside to help people to understand how God's work in the world is more than going to heaven. Since then, ironically, most of us aren't a part of that denomination. So there's that. Because it came to a point where you have to decide If this is not working in this system, then the job is to rebuild a world that isn't a part of that system. So sometimes the systems just need to die. um it also came to a point in which uh I had to decide whether I could be Christian at all, and I was saying this to one of my friends who was part of the group, Adrienne, and she was like, okay, come with me to this meeting at the seminary. And I was like, oh God. Then, but it was there that I actually met Jess and some other folks, and we were planning the 40 days of action. And there is where I began to see and interact with people that are having these same discussions, and it wasn't a discussion on whether, I was Christian enough or not, but how do we uh fight against these interlocking injustices, because this is the work of God. um just making sure. And then previous to that, I've done a lot of work around disability justice, partly because that was the work I was doing, but also because of my personal experience with disability. So there is where I then got to also see that, like, the work of disability justice is connected to the work of poverty and racism and all the things that were interlocking, that you couldn't like address one without the other. I would also say, because I'm in this space now, that it is cost a lot, and so I think that the work of um for God so loved the world that he gave, and that we are supposed to emulate those things to create the world now that is helpful for all people. It's something, because it goes against the systems that benefit from telling people, if you pray these particular words, then you'll go to heaven, right? Then you don't have to worry about fixing the things that are wrong and unjust here, because the world's going to be destroyed anyway because it's evil. So just like power through it and know that you'll get that crown at the end of your life or whatever. So because of that, it's a big cost. I think a lot of us in the Freedom Church have felt that, where it's like loss of opportunities, and for me, housing, and like uprooting my life and friendships, and still trying to engage in conversations even today that are interesting, where my Christianity is being questioned, which doesn't bother me now, but there was a point in my life where it would have. And then I'm in another season of deconstructing that if Christianity or institutionalized Christianity means all these things, then I don't know that I consider myself an institutionalized Christian. And so I don't know what that means as someone who's a pastor and has done work that way. Because I still have lots of questions, and still kind of forming and reforming those thoughts, but knowing that for sure the work is that we experience the beloved community here and now and in the life to come, but to focus on the here and now, because that's where we are. That's all I got. Thanks.